Copy that. Wait, did you say he's not breathing? The line crackles, then silence. A scream bleeds through the static, then is abruptly cut off. Only the hiss of the radio remains. That was the last transmission before everything fell quiet. James Kim, a father, a husband, a professional from Portland, Oregon. His story was supposed to be about a wrong turn in the Oregon wilderness during winter, but it became something much darker. And tonight, you're going to hear what happened, through the voices of the searchers who went looking for him, and what they say they found out there in the trees. If you're new here, this is MindFuel, where we bring you the stories that keep you questioning what's real, what's hidden, and what never should have been seen. Subscribe now, because this case doesn't just end in tragedy, it ends in questions no one has yet answered. The story begins in late November. James and his family had spent Thanksgiving away, deciding to drive back through the mountains. It was supposed to be faster, a shortcut, a road less traveled. The map promised it would be scenic, but a locked gate forced them to turn back. And in that moment, a single wrong decision took them off the main path and onto a logging road high into the snow-covered wilderness. For hours, their car crawled deeper into the mountains. The snow fell heavier. Signal bars on their cell phones disappeared one by one until the screens showed nothing at all. By nightfall, the family was stranded. The first reports came in when James's co-workers noticed he hadn't returned to work. His family hadn't checked in. Calls went unanswered. Then came the official missing persons report. Search and rescue was dispatched into some of the most rugged country Oregon has to offer. One ranger would later recall, "The woods swallowed everything. You could be 30 feet away, shouting, and you'd never hear an answer." Teams went out on foot, others on ATVs. Helicopters scanned the white ridges from above. For days, nothing. Then, a break. The vehicle was spotted from the air, half buried in snow, abandoned by the road. Inside, James's wife and 2 daughters, alive, freezing, desperate. But James himself was gone. According to his wife, he had left on foot, promising to bring back help. He carried only light clothing, a small jacket, and determination. No one could know that decision would mark the beginning of the end. Here at MindFuel, we dive into not just survival, but the hidden layers that surround it. Stay with us, because this isn't only about a man against nature. This is about what the searchers discovered following his trail. The first signs were ordinary. They pressed on. Days stretched thin. Supplies ran low. Yet the deeper the search went, the more unsettling the findings became. A shredded piece of cloth snagged on a branch. A map torn and half buried under snow. And then, blood. Just a smear at first, but enough to change the mood of the team instantly. One ranger radioed in what they'd found. Seconds later, that garbled call we heard at the beginning cut out mid-sentence. You're listening to MindFuel. Make sure you're subscribed, because this is where the story turns. They pressed into the ravine. The air grew colder. Even hardened searchers admitted the silence felt wrong, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then, they found him. James Kim's body, face down in the snow, several miles from where he'd started. The coroner's report would later say he died of hypothermia, but that's not the part most people know. Searchers claimed his body didn't look like it had simply fallen. Around him were markings in the snow, circular, chaotic. Branches snapped high above their heads. as if something had moved through the trees, fast, powerful. And the blood stains? They didn't match the way he had collapsed. To this day, officials keep the language clinical. Exposure, hypothermia, end of report. But the rescue team remembers the scene differently. One recalled in an interview years later, "It felt like something else had been there before us, like we weren't the first to find him." And then there's the missing photographs. His family's camera was recovered, its card intact, except for one series of images, erased, corrupted beyond recovery. Images taken on the last day he walked alone. Subscribe to MindFuel, because in a moment, we'll tell you what the rescuers said they heard on those nights in the forest. After the official recovery, the case was closed, but not for those who were out there. Some of the search team refused to return to the same ridge. They said they heard voices at night. A woman crying, then going silent when they called out. Others reported heavy footsteps outside their tents, stopping just at the zipper door, then retreating into the darkness. Hunters still report finding shredded bark, as if something clawed through the trees. Hikers swear they hear whispers when they pass the road where the family was found. And more than one has turned back after finding footprints that start, then suddenly vanish into open snow. James Kim's family lived. His sacrifice saved them. That much is true. But how he was found, and what else may have been moving in those woods at the same time, remains a question no one wants to answer on record. This story doesn't end cleanly. It ends with a family forever changed, a rescue. And if you think this was just a tale of survival gone wrong, think again. There are other cases, other roads, and other voices that still echo through the forests. You've been watching MindFuel. Subscribe, because the next story takes us even deeper into the places most people fear to go. The kind of places where some make it out alive, and others never come back. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. Not long after James Kim's ordeal, another case surfaced. This time, it wasn't a father with his family. It was a solo hiker, venturing deep into the restricted zone of the same national forest. No friends, no partner. Just him, a pack, and the promise of untouched trails where few dared to wander. He signed the logbook at the ranger station and disappeared into the trees. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. When he failed to check back in, rangers were dispatched. The first 2 days passed with no sign, but then the logs began to shift in tone. Day 3, search grid expanded. Found shredded backpack near creek bed, no blood. The ranger's voice is steady, clinical, yet the detail hangs heavy. A pack ripped to pieces, nothing inside, no sign of the hiker himself. Locals weren't surprised. They'd warned visitors for years. If you hear crying in those woods, don't answer. They said the sound wasn't human, even if it seemed to be. Day 4. Tracks located, erratic, sudden stop beneath cedar, no departure prints. As though he had vanished into thin air, the reports continued, each one more unsettling than the last. Day 5. Audible crying reported by 2 searchers at dusk. Source unverified. Team returned to base. Not one of them admitted it in the moment, but later, off record, several said the crying followed them through the forest, moving closer, then farther, always just out of reach. Here at MindFuel, we don't just tell the stories, we reveal the patterns behind them, and in these woods, the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Subscribe, because what the rangers found next will change how you think about being alone out there. The trail began clearly enough. A single line of footprints pressed into the damp soil, leading deeper into the trees. Rangers followed with measured steps, careful not to disturb the prints. Each one told the same story. The hiker was moving fast, almost running, then slowing, then running again. Panic written into the ground itself. And then, without warning, the trail ended. The last print was sharp and deep, the heel sunken, as if the man had braced himself against something. After that, nothing. A ranger lifted his radio, his voice carrying low through the static. "We've got drag marks here. They lead upward into the rocks." They shined their flashlights across the stone face. Thin streaks of mud, like something or someone had been pulled against gravity. Higher and higher until the path bent out of sight. On the ground below, they found what remained of his jacket. Torn from the sleeve down, threads stiff with moisture, yet no blood to explain the violence, just fabric, ripped open as though by force. One ranger's body camera picked up more than the others expected. Static at first, the sound of boots scraping against rock, labored breathing, and then faintly something else. A whisper, barely audible, almost part of the wind. "Turn around." When they played it back later, every searcher swore no one had spoken those words out loud. The official logs make no mention of the voice, only the jacket, only the drag marks. But for those who were there, the forest stopped feeling like a search zone that night. It became something else entirely, and this was only the beginning. Stay with MindFuel, because the next chapter reveals what lay beyond those rocks, and why some rangers refused to ever return. Night closed in fast, draping the trees in shadows so heavy even the strongest beams of the rangers' flashlights barely cut through. With the trail gone and the rocks too treacherous to climb in the dark, the team made camp. A small fire was coaxed to life, its glow swallowed almost immediately by the forest pressing in on every side. They spoke little, each man and woman staring into the flames, replaying the image of those drag marks in their minds. Then, sometime after 2 a.m, the silence split open. A scream tore across the valley, long, ragged, desperate. It echoed from ridge to ridge until it seemed to come from everywhere at once, and it was unmistakable. It sounded like the missing hiker. Instantly, the team stirred. Radios buzzed to life. Boots stamped out sparks from the fire as half of them prepared to move. One ranger's voice, urgent. "That's him. He's alive. We have to go now." But the veteran, a man with 20 years of service behind him, shook his head, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "That voice isn't him." The others froze, torn between protocol and instinct. The screaming came again, closer this time, breaking into sobs, then rising into a pitch that didn't sound quite human anymore. The rookie ranger couldn't take it. He shouldered his pack, switched on his headlamp, and sprinted into the dark. His radio crackled with every step. "Visual contact, moving fast." Then, static. A shriek of white noise ripped through every handset, so sharp and violent it made the others tear off their earpieces. And then, silence. No more voice, no more rookie, just the fire burning low. And the rest of the team staring into the tree line, waiting for something, anything to move. The forest gave nothing back. At MindFuel, we bring you the stories that official reports leave behind. Subscribe, because what happened after that nightfall would turn this rescue into something no one on that team has ever spoken of without trembling. At first light, the team moved out. The forest was hushed, but it wasn't the kind of silence that comes with dawn. It was heavier, watchful, as if the woods themselves were waiting. They pushed past the rocks, tracing what little trail they could find, until the trees opened into a small clearing. And there, the air seemed to thicken. Hanging from branches were shapes, bundles of sticks lashed together, but threaded with something pale and unmistakable: bone. Some large, some small, arranged in crude totems swaying gently in the morning breeze. The rangers froze. Not one of them spoke at first. It was the blood that broke their silence. Thick streaks painted across tree trunks in lines, deliberate, fresh. Finally, one ranger's voice cracked the air, a whisper sharp enough to cut. This wasn't animals. This was arranged. They pressed forward, weapons drawn, radios clutched tight. And then they saw him. The missing hiker. He was there, alive, slumped against the base of a massive pine. His chest rose and fell in shallow, frantic bursts. His arms were bound tight against the trunk with torn strips of his own clothing. At first, the team surged forward, relief, disbelief. But then they saw his face. His mouth had been sewn shut, crude stitches, jagged and black, pulling his lips into a permanent scream. His eyes darted wildly, locking on to each ranger one by one, pleading, begging. They moved to cut him free, but the closer they drew, the more he thrashed, shaking his head violently, as though trying to warn them of something behind. The clearing pressed in around them, every bone totem creaking in the wind. The blood on the trees glistened wet in the weak light, and in that moment, every member of the team knew the same truth. They weren't alone. This is MindFuel. Subscribe, because what came next would turn that clearing into the kind of nightmare that no one walks away from unchanged. The first blade touched the ropes binding the hiker's arms, and that was when the forest shifted. A sound rose around them, not the usual groan of branches, but something deeper. Trees creaked like timbers straining under a storm, though the air was still. Every head turned toward the tree line. Boots shifted in the snow. Radios clicked nervously, and then came the warning, raw and panicked. "It's behind you!" The clearing erupted. Body cams flickered in static as the rangers swung their lights wildly into the dark. Gunfire cracked through the trees, blinding flashes in every direction. Between each burst, only heavy breathing, boots crashing over roots, the shrill squawk of radios cutting in and out. And then, a scream. One of their own, cut short, ripped backward into the black. Branches snapped in a violent rush. His rifle clattered to the ground, firing once before going silent. The stitched-mouth hiker convulsed against the tree, his eyes rolling back, his chest heaving. He started slamming his skull against the bark, again and again, the dull thuds punctuating the chaos. The stitches tore with each blow, black threads snapping, skin splitting, but no sound escaped him. Only the frantic pounding of bone against wood. Another ranger fired blindly into the forest, his voice breaking between shots. "Contact! It's moving fast!" Before his feed dissolved into white noise. All the while, the totems above them swayed harder, clattering against one another, as though some unseen force had set the entire clearing to tremble. And in that madness, the line between rescue and survival vanished. This is MindFuel. Subscribe, because what unfolded in those next minutes is the part no official report ever dared to include. The survivors broke from the clearing in blind retreat, stumbling through branches that clawed at their arms and faces. Gunfire faded behind them, replaced by the ragged sound of their own breathing. Every instinct told them to run, but the forest gave no direction. Then, the ground vanished. The earth beneath their boots gave way, sending them crashing into a hollow beneath the trees. Lights flickered on helmets as they scrambled upright, gasping in the stale air. The beam of one flashlight swept across the chamber and froze. Bones, piles of them, not scattered like remains left to weather, but stacked, arranged. Femurs, ribs, skulls, sorted in neat mounds that reached the ceiling. Among them were scraps of fabric, faded ranger uniforms, tags that still bore names. And then the whispers began. At first, they thought it was the wind seeping through cracks in the rock, but when their lights shifted, the source became clear. Bodies. Several hikers, half buried in the bones, still alive, their skin gray, eyes sunken, lips trembling. They mouthed words that slipped into nonsense, syllables spilling over one another like broken records. Some clawed weakly at the ground, others just rocked in place, whispering to no one. One of them, his eyes catching the light for the briefest moment, rasped a single phrase before collapsing into coughs. "It's not one, it's many." And then, the chamber changed. A sound crawled in from the tunnel behind them, low at first, then swelling, like the groan of stone bending under weight. The survivors turned their lights to the passage and froze where they stood. Something stepped forward. Tall, skeletal. Its limbs too long, bending at angles that mimicked human motion without ever belonging to it. The surface of its frame looked stretched, thin as parchment, but the movement was steady, deliberate. The lights caught its face, or what should have been a face, but it was blank, smooth, featureless. What drew every eye was lower, a glow, faint, sickly, not from its eyes but from its chest. Then another beside it, and another behind. One by one, faint orbs flickered to life, beating slowly, like hearts burning through their cages of bone. The whispers around the pit swelled into a chant. The survivors clutched their weapons, but every one of them knew the same truth. Something else had been waiting, and it was not alone. This is MindFuel. Subscribe now, because what happened next inside that pit remains one of the darkest chapters ever pulled from the Rangers' files. Gunfire erupted in the pit, deafening in a confined space. Muzzle flashes lit up the walls, throwing jagged shadows over the mounds of bones. The creatures moved through the chaos, their chests glowing in unison, each flicker like a heartbeat, pulsing against the dark. Radios screamed with distortion. Not commands, not calls for help, but overlapping voices. Dozens of them, tangled together in tones that rose and fell like a chorus out of time. Words half-formed, syllables breaking, as though the forest itself had joined in. The Rangers fought in desperation, bullets tearing into the glow. But for every figure that staggered, another emerged from the tunnel. The whispers of the half-dead hikers turned frantic, louder, pressing against the walls, until the noise became unbearable. Through it all, one survivor fumbled with his body cam, the lens trembling as he lifted it close. His voice broke in gasps, words rushing, as though he knew he had only seconds left.
"We thought we were rescuing a hiker. We were being herded. We were never the hunters. We were the bait."
A crash behind him, one final scream. Then the feed jerked violently. For a split second, the camera caught it. A spray of blood across the lens, sudden and violent, painting the image red. And then, silence. No more voices, no more gunfire. Only the endless dark of the pit, and the faint glow of something moving closer to the fallen camera. This is MindFuel, Subscribe, because the ending you just heard isn't the end at all. It's the beginning of something no report ever dared to publish. The static held for what felt like forever, a wash of gray and white noise filling the silence. Then, slowly, the screen steadied. A black background, white text, the words of an official statement scrolled across. Final determination. Cause of death. Mountain lion attack. Search and rescue concluded. Case closed. Clinical, neat, sanitized. But the body cam feed didn't end there. The last frame froze. Grainy, blurred, almost washed out by the failing battery. Yet behind the wreckage of bone and blood, something remained. Tall, gaunt, its outlines stretched against the stone, impossible to mistake for any animal known to those woods. And in that frozen moment, it was facing the camera, looking straight into the lens, looking straight at us. The image burned into blackness. This is MindFuel. Subscribe, because the next story takes us deeper into the reports they don't want you to read, where missing hikers aren't just lost, they're taken.